Hi folks, Seth Leapson here. Thanks for watching my monologue. In these uncertain times, you may be thinking about personal protection. If you are, I urge you to visit my friends at Guns Etc. They'll help you find the perfect protection for yourself and your family, and they can even teach you how to use it. They've been protecting Arizonans for over 33 years, and they stand for the great principles this country was founded upon. Or you can just click on gunsetcetera.com. And if you like my monologues, please subscribe to 960 The Patriots YouTube channel. Welcome back, January 11th, 2021. For too many years now, too many people have bought into the notion that speech is violence. And they have been using that concept to censor and shut down speech. Political speech, the most protected form of speech there is, or should be. At least according to every Supreme Court case on the First Amendment until yesterday. As Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson put it, if there is any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it is that no official, high or petty, can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or any other matters of opinion, or force citizens to confess by word or act their faith therein. If there are any circumstances which permit an exception, they do not now occur to us." Close quote. This is another thing we may look at that we shrugged off for too many years. A neologistic view of constitutionalism or America we just kind of shrugged away. Well, that just happens with college students or on college campuses. The kids will be fine. We'll be fine. This insouciance over time, across many shrugs, over many novel views, has amounted to a surrender and a very low and degraded state, not just of our Constitution, but constitutionalism. Not just affecting Americans, but America. We spoke of some of this on Friday, the criminalization of speech and the far-reaching efforts to collapse categories and literally redefine what speech is. You've heard me long critique the idea that we now call freedom of speech freedom of expression, a phrase nowhere found in the First Amendment, because by that turn of phrase, that change of phrase, we have been able to get used to the notion that certain forms of violence do constitute protected speech, flag burning, let us say. That is a case of violence equating to speech. But until now, we have abjured the notion that speech can be the same as or equivalent to violence. In fact, the main test of when speech can be considered incitement comes from a 1969 Supreme Court case protecting a Klan rally, advocating a march on Congress, among other things. And the courts didn't find incitement there. What it said was, quote, "the mere abstract teaching of the moral propriety or even moral necessity for a resort to force and violence is not the same as preparing a group for violent action and steeling it to such an action," close quote. Speech has to be direct advocacy to direct imminent lawless action. That is, and has been, the court's definition of incitement since 1969. Not even shouting epithets at mourners' funerals, blaming the soldiers' deaths on the corruption of the country, has been considered a breach of First Amendment rights by the court. Argue as you will with these understandings, they are very far cries from a U.S. president vociferously objecting to election results in front of a rally, saying such things as Republicans need to fight much harder, or we're going to cheer on brave senators and congressmen and women, and we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them, because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength and you have to be strong, close quote. Hell, Chuck Schumer saying directly, naming two justices, Kavanaugh and Gorsuch specifically, "You have released the whirlwind and will pay the price." That is not incitement. Are we truly at a point where then telling people to fight for their political points of view, they are committing a crime? Take care. Our jails will be very full with people whose names are Biden, Harris, and about 535 other elected members of the House and Senate we could name. But today, Article 1 of the impeachment bill Nancy Pelosi and the House of Representatives have drawn up calls it a high crime and misdemeanor for Donald Trump to have spoken, as he did last week, to a protest in Washington, D.C., where the bill also claims the president made false statements. False statements. Again, take care. If saying something a political opponent thinks is false, our jails are going to be mighty full, and everyone will be impeached at one point or another. This is also the problem of converting the truth to my truth. Anyone can now just have their own facts, their preferred set of facts. And the more people on your side, that is the test of truth, evidently. Not any objective standard, just 51 people out of 100 constitutes truth. That's called might making right, not right making might. Of course, then, why have anything considered minority rights? Let us make no mistake about it. We are now entering the realm of criminalizing not just speech, but politics. It is becoming a crime to be a Republican. The problem is this is simply not democracy. Abraham Lincoln gave it to us this way, quote, "According to our ancient faith, the just powers of government are derived from the consent of the governed. Allow all the governed an equal voice in the government, and that only is self-government," close quote. Harry Jaffa put it this way, "By the principles of the Declaration of Independence, majority rule in a free society is not an end in itself, nor is it a source of the purposes served by free government. Majority rule exists to secure the rights with which all human persons are endowed by their Creator. The recognition of the origin of these rights in God and nature comes before any action of any majority. Only as we all recognize that the just powers of government exist to secure the equal rights possessed by every human being, whether in the majority or minority, can tyranny be prevented." So, a minority loses, holds a rally. The president addresses them. A part of that crowd, goes on a violent rampage. Those not in the rampage, along with the president, are then condemned. During the riots over the last summer, where as many as 30 people were killed and over 14,000 arrests were made, Kamala Harris said to Stephen Colbert that the BLM protests, quote, "are not going to stop. They're not going to stop. They're not. This is a movement. I'm telling you, they're not going to stop, and everyone beware because they're not going to stop. They're not going to stop before Election Day in November, and they're not going to stop after Election Day. And everyone should take care to note on that to note that on both levels, that they're not going to let up, and they should not, and we should not," close quote. They should not let up. Let's be clear. Nobody among us supports anarchy, riots, or violence. We criticized from the mountaintops when CNBC and MSNBC and Nancy Pelosi and other Democratic Party leaders refused to condemn the violence of last year, sometimes calling it a myth or just an idea, even giving it oxygen with such lines as Harris's or Pelosi being asked about it and saying people will do what people will do. Now, for those to turn around and ban all of us on social media and impeach the president is not just rich, is not just hypocritical, it's literally undemocratic. You've long heard me speak about how the left is trying to shut us up by comparing us to and analogizing us to terrorists. Our views are extreme, just as Al-Qaeda is extreme. We are fascists. We support someone worse than Hitler. All of this effort to marginalize us has now taken root. First you plan the images, then you, after enough propaganda, after enough stage setting, you execute. This is how every demagogic dictator took and takes power. Whether it's the bourgeoisie who are to be blamed for being born into a certain class, or dysgenic people for being born to the wrong race or religion. You create enough propaganda about them, you can then write them out of what you consider to be respectably human, entitled with the natural rights that inhere to every human, including those whose views you may disagree with. Supreme Court Justice Benjamin Cardozo wrote, quote, "Of the freedom of speech, one may say that it is the matrix, the indispensable condition of nearly every other form of freedom," close quote. Individual freedom. It doesn't mean a thing if you can't think and say the things you want to, having to do with our governance. That is why we have a Bill of Rights, after all, isn't it? To protect individual liberty? But as Dr. Jaffa reminds, if safeguards of individual liberty do not have any intrinsic worth, then neither does individual liberty have any intrinsic worth. And if individual liberty has no intrinsic worth, neither does individual life. And to take those rights away is not only a denial of any moral foundation of constitutionalism, it is a denial of any moral foundation of a political community. Why, after all, have a political community if you can't speak to the things you want the community to adopt, accept, or repeal and change. Free government is impossible, we know, if political minorities who lose an election set out to break up the government, refuse the notion of consent, refuse the results of an election. But it is equally, if not more impossible, if the political majority then sets out to punish minorities for their viewpoints. Thomas Jefferson taught this in his first inaugural in 1800, the first time in history, not just our history, that an entirely different viewpoint, Adams v. Jefferson, Federalists versus Democratic Republicans, changed power peaceably. There he said, quote, "All too will bear in mind this sacred principle, that though the will of the majority is in all cases to prevail, that will to be rightful must be reasonable, that the minority possess their equal rights, which equal law must respect, and to violate would be oppression." Close quote. Is Jefferson still allowed to be quoted? Is Lincoln? Is our Constitution? There's been a war over just these people and things. We saw it this summer. We saw it taking place in the 1619 Project. We saw it and see it in our colleges now, also our elementary and secondary schools, even to the extent of taking Lincoln's name off of them. So what, as a society, are we left knowing? Very little, it seems. You want to know why we have been campaigning for studying history and civics? They are our worst subjects, and we now see all that ignorance and rewriting of history playing out. We knew it was a problem in our schools. We just didn't think it was a problem with 80-year-old speakers of the House of Representatives and major corporations. But it is, either by willful ignorance or stratagem and knavery. I'm Seth Leibson. Be right back.